Next week, the Alaska Air Carriers Association will celebrate the career of 3 pilots who will be named Alaska Aviation Legends.
At the time, it was the state of the art, you know. Of course,
Fred Richards is one of those legends, and this patrol bomber plane is a legend too. This amphibian once belonged to Fred, which he bought as military surplus in 1948. Well, he wound up trading the engine and other parts for a float plane, so the plane never flew and deteriorated. Eventually, Ted Spencer, the founder of the Alaska Aviation Museum, flew it here, where it became the genesis of the museum. Well, Fred was 17 when he bought it for $58 at a sale held at what was then called Elmendorf Air Force Base.
and my dad and I were out there bidding on some other items, and among the items that was listed was 1 PBY as is where is. And my dad asked me how much money I had. At that time, I had $58 in my pocket, and I told him I had $58, and he said, good, that's what we'll bid on it. So we bid on it, and we were awarded the airplane for $58.
One of many stories in an aviation career that logged more than 30,000 accident-free miles. Richards has worked for passenger airlines and flown commercial planes around the world. And did we mention that in the early 1960s, he picked up a load of 47 reindeer in Mikoyak. And on the trip to Anchorage, the animals had to be rotated every 20 minutes to prevent their stomachs from bloating. And another pilot to be honored next week, Lee Stahelli, who says aviation is a disease that runs in the blood. He began as a Navy pilot and eventually ran his own air service out of Fairbanks, where he rarely put wheels on his plane, but would go back and forth between floats and skis. Well, there's a third pilot to be honored by the Air Carriers Association next week, Lynn Ellis, who flies for the National Park Service, and Jane Dale is also with us, director of the Air Carriers Association. And I know both of you know firsthand how important aviation is to our state and the Alaskan way of life. But Jane, maybe you could start off talking about, what its significance is and maybe whether or not we truly appreciate this.
Well, the association spends countless hours on advocating for the aviation community and reminding those that we're with that our economy in Alaska is about 10% based on aviation. And if there was a category, it'd be about the 5th largest industry in the state of Alaska. Without aviation, 82% of the communities would not have routine transportation.
Those are some amazing numbers. And Lynn, you do have a long history in Alaska, and when you think about the vastness of the state, it implies that there are a lot of different types of flying, and it sounds like you've done them all.
Basically, pretty much. I've started out as a pilot guide and then worked my way up into the aviation business of being an air taxi pilot, which I did for 30 years out of Gulkana.
And so you got your start flying at a very young age.
I did. My father had an air service out of Nabesna, and I worked with him. And then in 1978, I purchased Wilson Air Service, and I started my air taxi career there, hauling mail.
And I guess, did you have a hand in learning how to work with planes too?
I did. My father was an A&P and IA, and so
that's what?
That's an airframe and power plant mechanic and an inspection authorization, which allows you to return an aircraft to service. And
so he put you to work.
He did. He put me to work twisting wrenches at an early age. As a matter of fact, I built my airplane that I fly. That I still have it. It's a Super Cub, 1953 Super Cub that we built in our hangar in Nabesna, and he gave that airplane to me when I was 16.
And you still have it. Amazing. Well, it sounds like today you have a dream job flying for the Park Service, and there you are up in the mountains and looking at the glaciers. You've had some very interesting experiences, I imagine.
I have, actually, and Alaska is one of the most beautiful places to fly in the world, and I enjoy being a Department of Interior pilot. It's a really nice, it's a good job, and the people treat me well there, and I really do enjoy what I do for them.
What kind of assignments do you get?
I do a lot of resource flying for them, eagle surveys, caribou surveys, moose collar tracking, bears, wolves. We did a couple years ago, we collared 28 grizzly bears out of the Lake Clark And so we've done a little bit of everything. Plus I fly for law enforcement, and I also haul a lot of the maintenance people to do the inner workings of the parks.
Well, I got to ask you about hauling grizzly bears, because I hear you had one of those epic moments, grizzly bears that were supposed to be tranquilized.
We did. We had, in the early 1980s, the Department of Fish and Game decided that it might help the moose calf survival population by transporting a large amount of grizzly bears out of the Susitna Valley. And so they went in with a helicopter, they tranquilized the bears, and then they loaded them in a pickup and brought them down. And I might add, at this particular time, they were trying out a new drug that paralyzed these animals, and they had what they call periods of activity. And like, for one instance, they were driving down the road in a pickup truck, and the bear had a period of activity where he stood up, put his mouth over the tailgate, and bit through the tailgate of the pickup, leaving 4 perfect punch holes in the...
Well, that's a good story.
But then,
so what happened when they got in the airplane?
well, we'd load them up in the airplane and fly them across to some of the mining strips that were the other side of the Copper River. And this one particular bear that we had, she decided to have a period of activity in the aircraft. And as we're flying along there, Bob Toby, who was the biologist for us at that time, he said some word back there that got my attention, and I turned around and looked, and she's standing up in the back of the airplane, and he's back there with her, of course, to monitor her condition. And she starts walking towards the rear of the airplane, and I yell at Bob, you know, don't let her do that. And so he's hanging on to her.
That's a lot of weight,
It's
too.
a lot of weight to be transferring. This bear probably weighed 400 pounds, but she was trying to get away. And we didn't tie them down in the airplane because they're so powerful, there's nothing really to tie a bear to that they won't tear it up. So she stood up, Bob's on top of her, he's trying to restrain her, which is impossible, but he's working at it, and he goes, what are we gonna do? And I go, well, there's a strip a couple minutes away. And so, hold on. And so I usually fly over a strip and look at it, but that particular day I went straight in, and I got landed as quickly as possible, and we got the door open, and by then she'd settled down, and we drug her out of the plane and got her pointed off to one side. But it was
a trip to remember.
yeah, it was something that you
and
don't forget.
It kind of reminds me of a story that we covered a couple of years ago when they brought bison into the interior to reestablish a herd that had been there 100 years ago or so. I mean, these are amazing things that happen in Alaska.
It's routine in Alaska, yes. Lyndon brought out the bison to the Shaglik area in the C-130. And then later on, about a year later, when a troublesome bison remained in a village, Yukon Aviation brought a big helicopter in and helped move that one from the community.
So there are so many stories out there, and we only have time to just touch on a few. But one of the things, you know, we've been talking about in this show is the need for more pilots. What advice do you have for up-and-coming pilots?
Well, actually, I really want to see more pilots, because a lot of us are getting a little bit gray-haired right now, and we coming, you know, towards retirement. So if my advice to these younger pilots is to get out there and start working and looking into certain programs that are available, and I think Jane has a program that would be of interest to everyone.
And you look at the numbers here, we're recapping some that you gave earlier, 5th largest employer. So there's a lot of opportunity out there.
There's a tremendous amount of opportunity, and our program is with the Department of Labor's, both US DOL and Alaska DOL, and it is on-the-job training. So whether you're interested in a field in mechanics, the A&P mechanic, or the commercial pilot, we have an on-the-job training program available.
Well, one of the things that your organization does is it has an annual fundraiser where you promote the legends to bring back aviation history, but it has another purpose.
It does. It helps us fund scholarships that we award every year to people in the aviation industry. If they want to learn to fly, if they want to go to the university, or if they have another program in mind, they're eligible for one of our scholarships.
And that's kind of tough because, you know, some people get a leg up because their families can afford to give them pilot training early in high school.
Yes.
But that doesn't always happen for some families.
No, and it's very expensive. Some of the pilots that we've met have spent in excess of $80,000 to earn their degrees. So with the Registered Apprenticeship Program, we're able to fund some of that knowledge education. We can
Well,
shoulder the burden.
You know, we have another snapshot, a graphic we'd like to show you on aviation use in Alaska. You know, that Alaskans fly 8 times more than other people in the United States, or rather the Western United States, and ship 39 times more freight per capita. So that right there, it tells you that there's always going to be a lot of work in our state. But, you know, what about the future for mechanics? We talked about that some earlier. Lynn, how does that affect you when there's a shortage of mechanics?
Well, it is definitely a problem because the aircraft require 100-hour inspections, and so every 100 hours they have to be inspected, plus there's general maintenance in between, plus there's the annual inspections that are required each year, and just the general upkeep. So the mechanics they're, you know, it don't take just pilots, it takes mechanics.
Well, I understand that you've had to do some of your own mechanics.
I was fortunate enough to grow up with a pilot mechanic, and my father got us started early in that. And so by, you know, doing that, I was able to get my licenses early enough because you have to work. It's either go to school for 18 months or it's 3 years working underneath a certified mechanic. And so it takes a while, but luckily I was able to get my time in working under him, and so I was able to take the test and pass the required regulations to do it.
You know, so many great stories about the adventure of aviation in Alaska. Do you think that young people today can expect to have the same kind of experiences that you've had?
Yes, definitely. There's still a lot of opportunity out there, and there's a lot of things that need to be done. We will always have resource flying. We'll always have cargo flying. It'll just continue on. It's a little different than whenever I was young and starting out because it was a little easier to get started. It's now a much more expensive thing to do.
But do you think that as far as the training, do you think that in the long run, because we do worry about people's lives, you know, we have had quite a few accidents recently.
Well, yes, and we will continue to have accidents because of human error, but the thing about it is in the last 10 years, I have seen a tremendous turnaround in the training. The Medallion Foundation has furnished a lot of training and a lot of knowledge base. The FAA has resources now that they utilize for accidents that they didn't have in the past. And cockpit resource management has come into play a lot, and so has our management of risk. We have a lot of risk management formulas that we didn't have before.
And people learn by trial and error. And just in wrapping things up, you know, there is going to be a benefit, a banquet next Friday to honor the legends. So you can hear more of these great stories. Is that part of why you do this besides trying to raise money?
Oh, absolutely. There's stories that we want to hear and the public wants to hear, and everyone enjoys this banquet.
And what do you enjoy the most?
I enjoy meeting and listening and learning about what everybody has done. We've been honoring legends since 2011, and it's just been an experience in itself.
All right, well, thank you so much for sharing some of your stories with us. And finally, we love those clear days when we can fly into a community and get a good view. And it was just such a day for Jim Paulin as he snapped a few pictures out of the window of a flight. He was on a Pen Air Saab 2000 as he flew over Dutch Harbor, a body of water in the city of Unalaska. Well, thank you, Jim, for that photo and the newspaper stories that you've written over the years. And of course, whether you're in the air or on the ground, if you have photos, we'd love to share them. Send them to frontiers@ktva.com. We also welcome your comments. And we want to thank you for watching. We'll see you next week.